Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of SG Explain.
Hey, it's Rovik here.
And Willie right here.
Today we're going to be talking about something that is slightly controversial in a lot of people's minds, and it has to do with what we see on a TV and what we hear on our radio. And people sometimes don't really know that actually a lot of it is influenced by a higher body.
Ooh, sounds like propaganda to me.
Yeah. We are going to be talking about one kind of propaganda, but before we go into it, actually, we have brought on someone very special.
Oh, really?
Because, you want someone who has actually been there, who's worked with some of this behind the scenes stuff. And we actually are going to be introducing Janice from Sweet Potatoes.
Really?
Yeah,
Is she right here?
Yes, we can pan the video.
Oh, special guest today. And we have Janice right here today.
Hello, hi everyone. Hi, I'm Janice.
All our podcast listeners will be wondering what are we doing right now. So if you are listening, you gotta make sure you tune in on our live videos to see some of this. Janice, hi, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you are our first female guest. So
cool.
Oh wow, which episode is this already?
This is episode 16. But to be fair, it's mostly been Willie and I. So,
okay.
so it's not like we haven't had.
We finally have some level of gender diversity in our show.
Yes. Yeah. But Janice, you've worked on creative projects for broadcasts as well as online video platforms for almost 5 years now, more than 5 years.
I've been doing video production for about more than 5 years actually. But I think if you talk about dealing with a broadcast like Singapore National Broadcast, I think it's about 3 years. 3 years or so. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, and our episode today is going to be about public service broadcast values.
I see.
Right, because they wouldn't call it public service broadcast propaganda. So, public service broadcast values, is that something that you're familiar with?
Yes, almost every single project that I do with the broadcaster, it's usually under the PSB or the public service broadcast. It's also PSB kind of a funding.
Right, right. So let's dive into it.
Sure, let's go right into public service broadcast in this episode, right?
So I'll start by first of all sharing what PSB values are, and Janice, you can jump in and correct me if I ever get it wrong. But public service broadcast programs are programs that play, according to the IMDA, the Infocom Media Development Authority, play an important role in fostering a cohesive and informed society, as well as to celebrate our shared identity. So basically, these are programs that are funded by public service broadcast funds, and they aim to achieve a selection of social messages.
Right. So,
the social messages, we have 6 that I found online.
Okay.
And
let's talk about them.
They won't sound too unfamiliar. The first one is to promote social values important to Singapore.
Okay.
The second is celebrate our culture and heritage.
Right.
The third is promote racial and religious harmony. Fourth is build Singapore identity.
Right.
Fifth is stimulate knowledge and learning.
Wow.
And 6th is foster an informed society.
Sounds like a real tall order.
Yeah. How much of this made sense to you, Janice?
Well, I see these things all the time actually, but to be fair, we don't have to fulfill all 6 points in our project.
Okay.
We just need to pick one point to kind of like showcase in the shows that we do. So each project just minimally 1 point, one value. Yeah. Okay.
Some of these sound very, very ambiguous. What does it mean to build the Singapore identity?
Ambiguous is good in the creative content space.
Okay.
Because they put it this way, so it's up to the content creator to define what he thinks is a Singapore identity.
Okay.
Yeah. So it creates this very broad sense kind of thing, which is great. Because at least this way, it doesn't restrict us to saying, Singapore identity can only be defined and portrayed in a certain way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But can someone say that is not how I would define a Singapore identity in response to your proposal?
Yeah, sure. But most of the time, if you argue for it, they will just let it go. In fact, I have never in any of my pitches and my concepts that I submitted, they have come back to say, hey, look, I do not agree with your PSB value explanation and how you argue for it. Usually they'll let it pass because To be honest, I think the PSB values are just set there for just to have a reason for why the funding is there.
Okay.
Yeah, but not so much of like, oh, we have to stick to it really closely.
Right.
In fact, if you think about all the local shows that you've watched, I would say almost 90% of the shows are actually funded by PSB. But how many of these shows, when you watch, you feel like it has fulfilled very strongly any one of the value?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, Channel 8 dramas. I mean, I keep seeing lots of content with introducing the CHAS card, for example. So I suppose that fulfills the.
I think that also probably got funding
fosters
from,
an informed society.
yeah, but I also think that probably got funding from CHAS as well.
Possibly. Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Possibly.
multiple sources of funding.
But you know, since we're on the topic of building a Singapore identity, I mean, within the PSP value, that's one. I think that's one of the very important values that they hold, right?
Right.
Right, smack in the middle of 6 points.
Right.
What do you think? I mean, Janice, what do you think is your interpretation of the Singapore identity?
To be fair, I have no idea, because I think Singapore is I would say like such a rojak society. We have it's such a metropolitan society where people come from different places, coming in, sharing their different cultures and stuff. And the thing about Singaporeans, we're like a sponge. I feel like when people come in here, we just grab everything. We go like, hey, this is cool. Like the
Right.
cuisine is great, their culture is great. Let's just even their principles and ideology, let's just grab it and then we will practice it here.
Mhm.
So I think if you think about it, there is a very, say, like a singular kind of like how a Korean is very obvious how their culture and identity is, or Japanese or everything. But for Singapore, I think it's a mixture of different things, and that mixture, that metropolitan society, is what I think is a Singapore identity in a way.
Sounds like an assimilating culture,
Mhm.
right? We were trying to
It's like a melting pot.
of
Yeah.
sorts, right?
Actually, that it brings up a very good point, because one thing that happened was around 2012, the PSB did a review and they found out that while most PSB programs were doing generally well in terms of viewership and public satisfaction, that because of the internet, because of our increasing global exposure, more people are watching stuff like Korean dramas and American TV shows. Like there's some pretty there are some TV shows that are on American TV that would never fly in Singapore, right? And they were realizing that more needs to be done, the IMDA, more needs to be done to extend the reach and deepen the impact of PSB programs. I'm reading out of their website, actually.
Okay.
So the more to be done to deepen the impact of PSB programs instead of changing media consumption. So what they did was they actually commissioned an 8-member PSB review panel in 2010 to review improvements to the delivery of PSB programs and recommend ways to maximize the reach and impact. And these recommendations were actually submitted to MCI, Ministry of Communications and Information. Back then, it was the Ministry of Information, Communication and the Arts in 2012. So we can see that the PSB values actually evolves, right? It's not just something that is static and it says like this is what it means to build a so-called better media society. But I also find it slightly interesting that there's this intentional effort to deepen the impact of PSB values. Like, in your opinion, Janice, like what is your take on the role of PSB values in our media society? Because as a content creator, I'm sure you have considerations about like creative freedoms and all this kind of stuff.
To be honest, I think in Singapore, as a content creator, it's really quite hard to get funding.
Right.
And the government is actually one of the biggest funder when it comes to creative work, like videos, movies, TV series, or whatever. And one problem that I think all of us face is that when it comes to funding, it's usually PSB funding.
Okay.
And that means that our show have to at least promote or showcase one of the values. And for now, I don't think it's very much of a big deal, because like what we mentioned just now, most of the points are pretty ambiguous. Like if you think of like, especially point number one, promote social values.
Right.
Most, no matter what show you write, usually it can be, you'll probably promote like just maybe friendship.
Okay.
That itself is like promoting social values, or family, or like just being like maybe just the protagonist doing something good, and then in the end, he wins the war or the whatever challenge that he's being obstacle that he faced in the show, and that to it is it's like kind of a social promoting goodness, promoting social values, promoting. So it's very easy to actually kind of say like tick the checkbox for like getting
Right.
the
I
PSP
see.
value right.
I suppose it sets a sort of like a framework for reference on how the content should be like, and I think it doesn't really say what it should not be,
Yeah.
but
Right.
it says like what it should be like at least.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But speaking of this, I mean, speaking about what it should not be, what exactly are the restrictions for PSP related content?
Okay, so but when it comes to things like that, I think it's not so much of PSP values, but the natural like self censorship that all local creators have is that we tend to self censor.
Okay.
Okay, so like we tend to not want to put anything that is like potentially political, potentially like sexual, especially like homosexuality topics or anything like that into the film, because you know
Okay.
by doing so you basically number one you don't get funding, and
Mm.
number two you probably just it doesn't even get shown in Singapore at all.
Oh,
I
wow.
see.
Yeah.
I see.
So the PSP value is like what they try to encourage you to do, but it doesn't tell you what you shouldn't do. What you shouldn't do is usually done by us. We're like, okay, we have to self-censor just to make sure that our work gets out there.
I suppose there's a censor board as well,
Yes, a
right?
censorship
That actually that considers what should not be shown to the general public. What do you think from the perspective of the censor board? What is not allowed? I mean, we talked about political kind of content. I suppose that even had degrees as well of what kind of
Yeah.
political content. We talked about sexual references or sexual content. Then we also talk about what's the last one?
probably-
About gender or sexual orientation, which is like
Yeah.
LGBT related. What are the degrees? And I mean,
It's basically as long as it fits into their mold of like, let's say if we talk about political stuff,
yeah,
then it has to be good stuff. Like we
Okay.
could only say like this is whatever they're doing or whatever policies that have been created, they're good.
okay,
Or if we talk about homosexuality is totally out of the question.
right,
If we talk about racial stuff, we must always at the end of the day, the whole movie, the takeaway message has to be it's all about racial harmony. Yeah, so
see.
it has to be always be like what the government has always been wanting to promote.
Right.
Yeah, so anything against that or anything that you question, you don't even need to be against what they're trying to tell you, but anything that you question. So let's say I can't do a film whereby I question religion. I am not allowed to. Like
Okay.
I'm not saying that they're bad.
Mm.
So let's say if I want to talk about religions and stuff like that, I cannot do a show that question the basis of religion, even if it's a very kind of like a educational or a very objective point of view. I can't do that.
Right.
Yeah, because that to people might be like, oh, people can view it. Oh, you're questioning and you're risking making it like.
I mean, I suppose it's putting a specific religion in a negative light. Is that?
Potentially, even though if
Okay.
you go to it or you create the show in a very objective manner, like you're not
Okay.
saying it's bad or it's good, or you're just showing the both sides of how things work. As long as it doesn't fit what they want to promote, it's dangerous.
I see.
So
Yeah.
I mean, I would even say you could probably distinguish between what you were talking about with the censor board as your backstop or your negative stick, and then the PSB is actually not really any kind of like censure. It's basically a positive incentive towards promoting the content that they want to promote, right? So the censor board says you can't do this, whereas the PSB value says
You should do this.
you should do this, and we'll give you money for it. Like
Okay.
we'll give you money to do this thing.
Right.
And I'll explain why, right? So the IMDA supports the production of locally produced PSB programs, as well as the acquisition of foreign programs across genres with what is called a public service broadcast financing framework, right? So these are telecasts across MediaCorp's 7 television channels, free-to-air television channels,
Okay.
across all languages, and even on their online services, Toggle, which Janice, you are very familiar with, and basically they have this thing called a PSB contestable fund scheme. So that means even you and I, we can go and apply for the funds as long as we achieve the PSB value. So some of these shows are even on platforms beyond free to air, right? StarHub's, eCity, Super Sports Arena, all of their channels actually have PSB shows.
Right.
And I will say it's interesting because they say that a lot of these shows, if they want to be on MediaCorp channels, as long as you want to use PSB funding, you need to achieve these values. You kind of actually don't have a choice, because in Singapore, MediaCorp is the only television operator, right? So it is a monopoly. It holds a monopoly on all free-to-air television, and it even owns most of, if not most, a good number of radio channels as well. So there is this interesting dynamic that goes in place. But Janice, I remember you telling me that not all shows on MediaCorp are PSB shows.
Yeah,
right?
not all. There are some shows which are funded by MediaCorp themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's not many. I'm not very sure which particular titles are, but I know they do fund that.
Right.
But usually those shows are, how would I say, like they didn't get PSB funding. Could be different reasons. They didn't get picked up during the pitch, or they didn't fulfill any of the PSB values. Like maybe the topic's a little bit controversial that IMDA probably doesn't want to touch.
Right.
So and MediaCorp feels like, oh, that content, yes, it might be a little bit controversial, but we feel that it's good content. The commissioners might just go ahead and say, we'll fund it ourselves.
Right.
So that happens as well, but that's very rare.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm actually very surprised to hear that, because in my mind, I always just, I mean, it's a Singaporean assumption that everyone in our national television operator is going to be more or less just trying to follow the party line with this. But it sounds like there is opportunity for risk taking.
Yes, because I think people are starting to realize that let's just say Singaporeans are very tired and bored of watching safe shows.
Yeah.
That's why we're all on Netflix, we're all on like HBO, when we know like there's nudity, there's like, gore and all the kind of violence, and people consume that kind of content and they love it. But in Singapore, when you watch it on the broadcast, it's just all very, very safe, positive, like, yeah, let's do these kind of like, very safe shows. And I think they are realizing that because of that, they're losing a bit of the viewers. Viewers like things that are, exciting.
Right.
So I think they are also trying to take a step into like loosening up like the kind of restrictions, but they're doing it at a very, very slow pace. Yeah.
I suppose it also is possibly, I mean, PSB is since because of these what I call global influencers, could be a counter narrative to the multitude of content available online.
Yeah.
And nobody's producing content that might be showcasing positivity in the Singapore society. And could this then be an example of the counter narrative to that? What do you think? I mean,
you're saying that because Singapore,
because we're bombarded such, like, for example, content that's rich in for example, controversy, sexual references, or even like exploration for certain controversial topics. There's a need to then counter, for example, or introduce topics that maybe that shows the even more positive kind of content within society, rather than to show all these content as well. I mean, what do you think of that?
so I mean there are positive content on even the global platforms, right? But what the difference is that it doesn't feel so sterile. Even if it's a positive content, they are usually how to say, it's still a bit of like a bit of drama and everything involved. But in Singapore, a lot of our positive content still feels very sterile because it's very restricted. Like so one thing is like for us when we go for pitches, number one, we have to fulfill the PSB value. The second thing, like they always tell us that we have to fulfill the Singapore story. We have to tell a Singapore story. You can't tell a story that is that we feel like it's set somewhere else. It has to be like a Singapore story. It has to be ideally set here. It's coming from a perspective of a Singaporean, dealing with a Singaporean life, that kind of thing. But it's a bit difficult because, like I mentioned earlier, one thing that I like about Singapore is that it's so diverse. And I'm a Singaporean, right? And I'm the way I am. But there could be someone else, like two of you are Singaporeans as well, but you're so different from me. Maybe even the accent that we use, or even the language that we use, it's so different. I have
calling out my accent, Janice.
No, like I have
No,
I have
fine,
Singaporean
you're
friends
fine.
who speak and they don't sound like the standard so-called Singlish accent.
Right.
But they're Singaporeans, they're born and bred here and they were raised here. But that to a lot of locals is like, oh, that is like so angmoh, things like that. You need to sound Singaporean for me to relate to you. And I think that is really weird because Singapore is just so diverse,
Right.
And yeah, so when we have to go and pitch for things like that, we are very restricted to certain kind of stories that we can tell, and that makes it very sterile.
Right.
And that's why I think a lot of people complaining when they watch like Channel 8 dramas. All they see is like families squabbling, and then like hawkers and stuff, because they are kind of in a way restricted by certain content that they do, and also because of the audience that they're targeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We actually have a comment, Willie, from Lawson Lau. He says, "I think interesting content keeps one thinking and or feeling, perhaps even after some time."
Mm.
Yeah, no, that's exactly.
That's definitely. I think that's the power of media and content in the first
Yeah.
place, right? Is the ability to shape and influence an individual or society altogether.
You know, I was thinking about it. Theoretically, our show would be very viable for PSB
Oh,
funding.
really?
But I would not touch it.
So,
It's
well,
fine.
PSB people, if you're hearing this,
if you're willing to be slightly more liberal with
Yeah.
your
but maybe let's just explore what exactly constitutes a PSB kind of content and what exactly are the kinds of content being funded by the PSB value, right?
Right.
So I think there are several. One of which I'll just go on a list. We have, like, for example, current affairs programs. It's not just drama, right? It's current affairs program. I think, like, for example, Channel News Asia is doing a lot of current affairs programming. You have children's program, which is about kids. You have dramas, right? Channel 8 dramas. We have documentaries. We have game shows.
How do you put PSB values in game shows?
I see. What are the 10
Okay,
most...
so if you think about it, there were some recent game shows that were talking about, like, I use something about being Singaporean. Like,
Oh, the one done by Jose
or-
Leon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that definitely fulfills the PSB values.
Oh.
Because, like, to promote Singapore identity, right?
Right.
Yeah. So things, game shows like that, I
Yeah.
would assume.
Sports news?
If it's like
Teen
athlete.
sport.
Like Team Singapore,
Yeah,
yeah.
Team Singapore.
right.
You have technology programs. I think that's just to inform people about the, I don't know, technology.
Sure.
Yeah,
That is probably like developed and brought into Singapore.
Yeah.
What kind of,
Yeah, travel programs, Singaporeans traveling overseas,
Right.
and variety shows.
So I mean, Janice was talking about pitches just now, right?
Okay.
And actually, that is referring to the PSB funding that we were talking about, the contestable funds.
Right.
So I don't have the numbers for this tranche of funds, but from 2012 to 2016, the IMDA, government through the IMDA provided $630 million. And that is an increase of 35% from the previous tranche of funding. And they measured that funding caters to over 4,000 hours of programs every year
Wow.
for that tranche.
Wow.
So that means that is the impact of such PSB funding. It
I
is
see.
basically creating over 2,000 local productions and the rest of 2,000 hours of local productions, and the remaining hours are basically programs that were acquired under the PSB framework. Guess how many viewers in Singapore? Actually, Janice mentioned the number quite casually, but she was actually right. Guess how many percent of Singaporeans have watched a PSB show?
No, I'm not sure. What's the number?
90%. 9 in 10
90%.
TV viewers in Singapore, or around 4.3 million viewers, have been influenced in some way by locally produced PSB programs.
Really, is that true? I don't really feel that. Is it really now? 10?
Yeah, that is the definition.
I mean,
of
as long
subliminal
as you
programming.
watched a local show, you
Mhm.
probably watched a PSB funded show already.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, because like majority of the shows, majority of titles are actually PSB
I
funded.
see.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. So
When was the last time you watched a PSB funded show, or maybe a local show for the
I
men?
watched one of Janice's shows
Oh, okay. That's cool. Yeah.
recently. So
I guess you're one of the 9.
Yeah. I mean, Willie, you produce these shows as well. So let's not pretend like you're not. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the fact about how people have been receiving the PSB shows.
Okay.
Janice, in your experience, how do you feel like the reception has been? Do you feel like, because I guess as a content creator, one of your biggest goals is to connect to your audience.
Mhm, mhm.
How do you feel that is affected, either positive or negative, or maybe not even at all?
Well, I think when it comes to shows in Singapore, because majority are PSB funded in a way, so like I would say just generally shows in Singapore. So far the reviews and the feedback have been good. That the quality have been improving. There are more shows being churned out every year and stuff like that.
Yep.
But because of the global competition, I think people are still more like they tend to still veer towards like watching Netflix movies, like
Mm.
like or even HBO and stuff like that.
The majority of our consumption is coming from these foreign platforms.
The English content consumers
Right.
are going on HBO and Netflix, the Chinese content consumers are watching Korean dramas and Taiwan Chinese dramas.
Right.
I would say the older generations are the the older generation and the younger kids who are still watching TV. Those are still watching TV that are consuming like local shows as well as like Hong Kong dramas and stuff like that. So you can see it's very segmented, the kind of content that people consume. Yeah.
Right. I see.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of key features of the PSB program. Recently, as of 5 years ago, they allowed PSB funding to go for online TV, so Toggle and internet TV and all of this stuff are also eligible. PSB funding can be used for program pilots. That means you don't have to commission a whole show.
Okay.
You can just commission a pilot using PSB funding. And there's also the Public Service Broadcast Rights Framework, which means that previously the old framework said that if I give you money for the show, the copyrights are mine.
Okay.
But now this new rights framework gives ownership of the content to the creators.
Oh, cool.
I mean, if you get to own the copyright, you get to decide who accrues royalties. Have you taken advantage of this?
Yeah, every single show that we work with for PSB, they all belong to us at the end of the day. So
Okay.
the arrangement is quite interesting. So they fund our shows. We create them. We put them up on MediaCorp channels, be it Toggle, Channel 5, Channel 8, whatever, for a year. So for 1 year, MediaCorp has the exclusive rights to screen the shows. And after that year, the rights come back to us. And then from then, we have the ownership of it, so we can then distribute it overseas. We can distribute to other platforms, to airlines, to cable, to whatever.
How's it like? I mean, since the value is pretty much saying that we need to talk about the narrative about Singapore life, Singapore story, and the Singapore values, right? How tenable or how effective is this in selling to, for example, foreign broadcasters? And is this even possible?
It's terrible, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I mean, you think about it. If I am, I'm Singaporean, right? Do I really want to watch what people in like? I would say out of all the, let's say in Thailand right now, they make maybe, let's say, 100 titles a year. How many titles do you watch from Thailand this year? Maybe none or one.
Me, probably zero.
Yeah. So the thing is that because we're not that interested. Yeah. So if you think about it, do you think people overseas are that interested in our daily HDB lives? No, they're not that interested. So and that's, I think, the problem. Even though we take back our titles, it's very difficult to sell our content unless we sell it to airlines. And even if it's airlines, it's usually like locally run airlines, like maybe Silk Air or like SQ.
Right.
The other airlines, the other broadcasting stations might not want to pick up your title because it's like, my viewers are not going to watch a show because it's got no relation to them. I don't care about what you do in Singapore. So a lot of times I think there's a struggle. Like, we want to get our content out there, means that whatever we write has to be content that can be consumed globally. Means it cannot be too much of like Singapore jokes or Singapore too heavily on Singapore story. But to get the PSB funding in the first place, you need to write a Singapore story. So it's always, there's this like struggle, like, do I want to take their money, do I not want to take their money, so I think at the end of the day, you're gonna have to find a balance somewhere.
I see.
Yep.
That's a very interesting point to note, right? I mean rights as well as really guiding the content to a specific kind of shape and form, and whether that may be relevant to the Singapore market, but may not be relevant to another market that they may not have the same value system as well. Yeah. And I find that really that's just a very interesting point.
I think a lot of time people see that, how the Korean dramas are making such a big hit and people are consuming Korean dramas, and they think like, it's because of how unique the Korean culture is,
right?
And people are consuming that.
Right.
I mean, it's a yes and no thing. So I think a lot of Singaporeans, they think like, if we do it this way, we showcase our Singapore culture, and when people see like we're so unique, we're so different, they will want to like consume our content as well. But the problem is we don't even have a very distinct Singapore identity.
Okay.
For people to say, oh wow, look at that, look at Singapore national costume or our architecture and everything. We are like, our architecture, if you look at our old shop houses, they're beautiful, but you can get similar looking one in Malacca.
That's true.
Yeah. So it's like you have to find a way, like, how do you then
so there are limitations in our sort of cultural exports that we have, because we sometimes it may not seem very unique
Yeah.
in our region.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the thing is that is why I feel like selling a Singapore story, saying it from a very cultural and very like historical point of view, might not sell, because I think we're a very young nation. We haven't reached that point where we have a huge ass culture behind us and say like, hey, we're like the Japanese, we're like the Koreans, we're like the Vietnamese. We have very strong language and culture that we can sell, and people go overseas go like, oh, this is so exotic, this is so different. They're not gonna go. They come to Singapore, they go like, oh wow, this place is like Dubai, that kind of feel. It's not the same. So I don't think that should be a Singapore selling point. Yeah.
Right.
That's true.
What if you were to see a future for PSB values? What would you want it to look like?
I honestly don't think
There
we
should be-
need a PSB values anymore.
Okay, so no
Yeah.
PSB values.
I feel like if you think about it, which of
But you still need the funding, right?
yes, you need the funding, but the funding shouldn't be about promoting social values in this way. I think the funding should be about promoting content,
Okay.
getting the content to fly overseas instead of like trying to promote a Singapore story, trying to promote like between being nice to people and stuff, because all these things trap the creativity of the content creators.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's difficult. You should have a funding, yes, to fund and let the creators do what they think is right. And then, I mean, you're gonna vet through the pitches anyway. You don't like it, you can always kick it out if it's like, let's say, too controversial for you. But having the content creators right from the start pitch something within the PSB values, it's very restrictive.
I suppose that's a shift from a value focus to I'll say audience focus or industry focus.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest part about this is recognizing that content creation is not only about value propagation. It is a career, it is a passion for people. And I'm hearing multiple things, right? So I'm hearing content creators need to survive financially.
Okay.
Right? And they're gonna need to go out there and find sources of funding.
Right.
The biggest and the only free-to-air TV operator, is MediaCorp. And MediaCorp's most of its programming is PSB funding.
Okay.
So therefore, by virtue of logic, if you want to have a sizable portion of revenue in Singapore as a local content creator, you're going to have to get PSB funding, and therefore you're going to have to fall within this framework. Right. So it is almost geared, and it's a very Singaporean thing. I think we realize at this point, there's no hard and fast rule for things, but there is a very convenient set of conditions for a certain way of life.
Okay.
Right. And in this case, the way of life that is convenient is for you to just get funding from PSB's framework. Right. And so therefore, what's happening is that, Janice is one person, but what I'm hearing is that as a result of all of this, then there's not really many alternative options for content funding for content creation. Am I right? Is that an accurate?
Yes, but the good thing is HBO and Netflix are actually starting. Even Disney, they are starting to start looking around Asia and say, like, let's do original content.
Okay.
Like Asia, focus.
And they're going
to Thailand. They're going to Japan and say, like, I'm gonna fund you. You make original content and I'll put it on my platform. And I think that is starting to happen. So I think even in Singapore, people are starting to keep a lookout. We're like, okay, we don't have to keep on relying on the PSB funding.
Right.
If these companies come in and start funding, we'll take the originals. We'll go with them.
Right.
Because we have we don't have a PSB value restrictions.
Right.
We don't have we have to tell a Singapore story kind of a framework that we have to work in.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you want to see in the future of PSB, Rovik?
I am actually okay with the PSB value framework.
Okay.
So I think having such funding is a good way for the government, as it should be, to encourage a certain kind of content.
Okay.
Should it be the only kind of content? Should it be the main form of content? That is something that I have questions about, right? And I mean, for a lot of these shows, I actually don't have firm opinions. I'm here to just ask questions.
The other way to look at it is that the government would say, or rather, why should you even need to take the PSB? You could, if you really want to talk about something else, you could actually do it and find funding for yourself.
I just told you that's difficult, right? Like, let's be real. Singapore is not the kind of place where alternative sources of funding are free flowing, especially if the platforms.
Are you speaking about the media industry in particular?
well, not just the media industry, but especially with the platforms,
Okay.
right? If you want platforms that are geared for your audience already, again, those are also by regulation and by historical legacy controlled in a certain way. Right?
But I think that is also why YouTube is flourishing here in a way. Yeah,
Mhm.
because there's no restriction on YouTube.
Right.
You do your own content. You get funding from your own like brands and everything, and you don't really have the PSP value restrictions.
Right.
I mean, but because you're still a Singapore content creator, every single YouTuber in Singapore still does self censorship. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Because you
other
don't
thing.
want to be the next Amos E. You still want to do like self censorship and like, okay, yes,
you don't
I
want
have.
to be singled out.
Yeah, I am still within the political and like the laws and regulation of Singapore, so I have to keep within that. But I am not restricted to just telling Singapore stories. I'm not restricted to making sure that my video promotes a certain value. My video could be a totally like it's just a whole day of nonsense.
Right.
But I feel like doing it. People enjoy watching it.
Mhm.
So be it. Yeah, and things like that.
Right. Well, I mean, we have a guest who left some Mandarin, and of course, this gentleman said that you said it really pretty well, and haha.
Well, I needed you to translate it for me
that's just
because
pretty much
I
it.
can't read Mandarin.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Right.
Cool. Janice, we asked this question at the end to all our guests. You're our
Mhm.
second guest.
Yeah.
Okay.
How do you personally identify as a Singaporean? What does it mean?
Yeah. What does it mean
For
to be
you.
a Singapore for you?
What does it mean to be a Singaporean for me? I think the fact that I can speak a language that it's okay. Let me just tell you guys a story. So I was actually in Korea for a few months during my university days because I was
Okay.
studying in Korea for a while, and I have some Singaporean friends with me in Korea. So and a lot of other international friends. So every time when I speak to my international friends, I'll speak in the proper grammar, I'll enunciate my words and stuff like that. And the moment I turn over to my Singaporean friends, I start speaking in Singlish. And it's always very entertaining because for the longest time, my roommate thought that I was speaking in a different language. So
Oh,
she
yeah?
always goes like, "Oh, I don't understand. Like, what language are you using when you speak to your fellow like Singaporean? Because like it sounds so interesting." I was like, I'm speaking English. It's like, no, but I don't understand. It's like, oh, it's just Singapore English. It's cool. It's like, and the thing is that we use the exact same kind of words and stuff like that, but the way we pronounce it, the way we use it, our grammar, it's just so different, and only fellow Singaporeans understand.
Mhm.
And I think to me, I think that's yes, it's not proper English, but is there really such a thing as proper English? The Americans have their own English. The British have their own English. Australians have their own English, and I think I'm proud to say Singapore have our own English.
Right.
Yeah, as long as a Singaporean, I'm able to toggle between both, so that people who are not Singaporean can understand me. I think I'm good.
Right.
Yeah.
I suppose that really identifies a Singaporean by the kind of the form of our language,
Yeah.
the way we communicate.
And our comfort in it. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
It's such a comforting. Yeah, I mean, I can completely agree with Janice. When I've been overseas, it's not even just the language, the vocab. So we've done an episode on Singlish. Big plug, if you want to go check out that episode, go ahead. But it's even the vernacular, right?
Yeah.
The moment someone says a regular English, grammatically correct English phrase, but with the Singaporean twang,
Mm.
you know.
You
that-
know, yeah, you know you're dealing
Oh,
with
you're a
Singaporean.
Singaporean.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, immediately.
The worst is, I mean, the furthest you could be off is that they're Malaysian, but even then, it's still within a degree of difference.
Of
Yeah,
course.
but that applies to Mandarin as well. Because I can tell when I speak Mandarin with my friends, I can tell if you're from Taiwan, from China,
Oh, yeah?
from Malaysia, or from Singapore, because we speak very different. The accent and even the words we use, the intonation, it's so different.
Wow.
Yeah.
You should have been on our Singlish episode. Cool.
Right.
Well, Janice, thanks again for
Thank
coming
you
on
for
our
having
show.
me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
this was a very fun episode.
It is.
It seems like we got a lot of engaged viewers as well.
We
So
did have
if
a lot.
you have an opinion on this, definitely send us a message on Facebook.
Or just leave a comment below as well.
Yeah, and make sure to share, review. If you are listening to this on our podcast, we do ask that you leave us a review, because the way Spotify and Apple Podcasts work is that the better reviewed, or rather the more reviewed, just purely in terms of volume,
Of course.
get more publicity. we
And of
want-
course, many people will then, of course, benefit from this information about the Singapore culture or
Yeah.
the ways of Singapore as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is our goal.
Mm.
So
Thank you very much, audience, for tuning in to today's episode on As You Explained.
yeah, and
And so, my name is Willie.
Rovek.
And I'm Janice.
All right, see you guys.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.